Our next keynote speaker, mashallah, is somebody who is very approachable and very engaging, especially with the youth, mashallah. Shaykh Haisam has studied the Islamic sciences across numerous countries, including Yemen. Great knowledge of the Islamic sciences, mashallah, but we are blessed in that we have somebody not only with knowledge of the deen, but also with knowledge of the law of the land, mashallah. Shaykh Haisam is a practicing lawyer for Garrison Lawyers, he's a principal lawyer, and his field is family law, mashallah. So really, alhamdulillah, we couldn't get a better speaker than Shaykh Haisam, and I'm very excited to hear about the nasiha that he's going to give us, and the guidance and inshallah the advice that he's going to give us about how to move forward, especially looking at these topics which do affect the vulnerable and which may affect us in our lives as well. Jazakumullah khairan, Shaykh Haisam.
Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, hamdan yuwafi ni'mahu wa yukafi'u mazida, wassalatu wassalamu ala khayril anam wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, praise that's worthy of a beneficent bestower of bounties and favours. And we ask our Lord Most High to send copious, unlimited blessings and salutations upon our beloved Prophet Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. So jazakumullah khair to the organisers for bringing this event together, in particular, mashallah, Abu Munir for his impassioned lecture and insight into what's happening into the Muslim community. And I echo the sentiments that Brother Abu Munir has spoken about. I'm not involved with the National Zakat Foundation in terms of any affiliation. I'm independent of what they're doing, but I do support what they're doing to make sure that yourselves are clear about what my position is on that. But everything that was said by Brother Abu Munir, I echo those sentiments, because that's pretty much exactly what's going on in the Muslim community. So I thought the topics is rather large. There's a lot there to be thought about, a lot there to be discussed, and even referring these things back to the Qur'an and the prophetic tradition is actually quite a monumentous task. So what I thought I would do was just go over a few of the areas, actually most of the areas, but just give a few little bits of insight and little bits of understanding, hopefully inshallah for myself and for yourselves, so we can get a comprehension of what happened in the time of the Prophet of Allah alayhi salatu wasalam. Sallu ala Rasulillah, Allahumma salli wa sallim ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. And also what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has ordained for us in the Qur'an. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He knows what was and what is and what is to be. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hasn't left things out of His book, hasn't left things out of the Qur'an, so that we don't have a guidance, or we don't have a plan, and we don't have some sort of a methodology upon which to progress. And being as our respected sister said that my background is in family law, I thought the appropriate place to start was and is in family violence, and particularly how it affects women and Muslim sisters. And moving on from what Brother Abu Munir said about how we can break that cycle. And so basically when we look at family violence, I mean there's a whole spectrum, and I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist, but in terms of dealing with family violence, it's quite prevalent in family law matters, and the Family Law Act deals with family violence in several places, but it's a very prevalent thing, particularly when it comes to children and sometimes even when it comes to property. So there's two basic types that I'd like to discuss and think about and have yourselves think about, which is the coercive or controlling violence, which is generally, I mean, it's a bit sexist, you might say, that it's generally the men that are perpetrating this kind of activity and this kind of violence upon their intimate partner. And then there's the second type of violence, which is what they call situational spousal violence, which is two people, intimate partners, having an argument and they can't control themselves and they break out, one hits the other, but it's not coercive and controlling. And so we see both types in our community. We see both types in our community. When I say that, I mean as Australians and as Muslims and as Australian Muslims. So we see both of those. The one that's more insidious and is a lot worse is the coercive and controlling violence. So I thought what I would do is go through the section 4AB of the Family Law Act, and we know that hitting someone, that's clear. We know that physical violence is a clear type of violence, but there are other more, as I said, insidious and and sinister types of ways that people control, and in particular men control women. And so some of the things they talk about in that section are stalking, repeated derogatory taunts, because of course stalking makes a person feel like they're under control, that they can't go anywhere, they can't do anything, they can't be free to live their life. Allah Azza wa Jal khalaqa al-ibad ahrar. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He created us as His servants. We're free. We're free to make decisions about whatever it is we wish and free to move. Repeated derogatory taunts. So putting someone down all the time. And this one, it happens both ways, a lot. And sometimes it actually happens worse from women to men. But of course, again, that's making the person lose their confidence and making the person feel inferior to the other one so they can control them. Intentionally damaging or destroying property. These are all mentioned specifically in the Act. Okay, intentionally causing death or injury to animals, and people do this. I've come across cases where people, get the cat and say, if you don't do this, I'm going to kill the cat, rip the cat's head off. I know it's a bit, gruesome, but that's the reality, unfortunately. Unreasonably denying the family member financial autonomy. So if that person's earning money, the other spouse, generally the husband, will take the money from the wife, withholding financial support, or not allowing that person to keep connections with their family. So the reason why I wanted to mention the Act before I mentioned anything from the Qur'an and anything from the Sunnah is because all these things, when a'udhu billahi subhanahu wa ta'ala, they're impermissible in our deen. We're not allowed to do that to each other. And I'll go through that a little bit more. But when we look at the basis, or what the psychologists, because we have to do, even though we're lawyers and we're pretty dull in that regard, it's just black and white letter law. And we also have to delve into what they call the social science, which is what the psychiatrists and psychologists have said about it. And so, because that forms part of the cases that we run in terms of who is the best person to look after the children, what are the circumstances of what happened during that relationship, and how should it be sorted out. And so, basically what the essence of coercive violence is misogyny, which means that a man thinks he's superior to a woman, or a husband thinks he's superior to his wife. That's the basic element of it, that a woman is not worth as much as a man, or she can't make her own decisions, or she's not capable of making her own decisions. And for us as Muslims, we get the oft-recited verse from Surah An-Nisa, I think it's verse 34, about al-Rijal qawwamuna ala al-Nisa. So that men are the caretakers, whatever you like to use that word, qawwama. The qawwam means to stand. Qa'im, that's the qama is the asl, the foundation of the word qawwam. And in other words, qawwama means to constantly allow that person to stand. So if we look at it in the Arabic language, qama bi khidmat shaykhihi, the person served, that's what the word actually means. That's the connotation in the Qur'an. And when we look at some of the scholars, what they talk about, the verse doesn't say the husbands the caretakers of their wives. It says الرجال قوامون على النساء, that men are responsible to allow women to stand upright. So the Shafi'is in particular say that's ala al-itlaq. In other words, that's a general statement by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that says that all men, irrespective of their Muslim, non-Muslim, whatever the case might be, have that responsibility to provide whatever is needed for all women. So that means, brothers, some of you are out there, brothers, it's on us. It's our responsibility. We have to make sure that we do whatever we can, bi-idhnillahi subhanahu wa ta'ala, to make sure that women, not just your mother, not just your sister, not just your daughter, not just your wife, not just your auntie, all women have what they need to live. And we know throughout the world, we know throughout the statistics from the United Nations, from Australia, everywhere, the people that are most disenfranchised are women, generally speaking, and not generally speaking, specifically speaking. So that goes against the idea of misogyny. That goes against, because what did the Prophet say, alayhi salatu wasalam? Stawsu bin nisa'i khayra. He said, stawsu means look forward to, or think well of the women, think that they're going to do good things. So that again goes right against the concept of misogyny. So in terms of that, that's a preventative method that Allah Azza wa Jal has used, and the Prophet of Allah has used to say that it's not good enough. You cannot coerce and control your other half, sometimes your better half, depending on the situation, because you feel you're more superior to that person. And even the rest of the verse, وَإِذَا خِفْتُمْ نُشُوزًا, if you fear that, nushuz, isti'la, they say in the Arabic language, that the wife isn't holding basically the orders of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فَعَدِهُنَّ وَهْجُرُهُنَّ وَضْرُبُهُنَّ. So the rest of them are all fine, but وَضْرِبُهُنَّ, that's the big one. And as it's translated in some of the books, hit. Now the word daraba which is not, it's not how it is, but that's what it's translated in the books of old and the imperialistic colonialist days when they found out about the Qur'an. That's how they wrote it in the English language. So the word daraba has 12 odd meanings even in the Qur'an. Daraba Allahu mathala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has espoused an example. يضربون في الأرض, that they trade. في سبيل الله, يضربون في سبيل الله, they're in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. ضرب عليهم الذل والمسكنة. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about Bani Israel, that he, I had the word previously, struck them with, afflicted, that was the word, jazakumullah khairan, afflicted them with, they were abased and disgraced. Right? So there are many, many meanings, and what the exegetes, the mufassirun, what they've said is that if we look at corporal punishment in Islam, and we have that in our Sharia, there's no getting away from that. We're not trying to get away from that. If somebody steals your, today it's probably your iPhone, someone steals your iPhone, you can't go get an axe, chop their hand off. Right? There's no taking the law into our own hands when it comes to corporal punishment, hudud in particular. So what the jurists in particular, those of usul al-din and those of maqasid al-sharia, those are the foundations of usul al-fiqh, the foundations of jurisprudence and the purposes of Islam. They say, how can that be the case then? How can it be the case that the husband takes into his own hand, so to speak, the corporal punishment? So they're saying that's not the meaning of the verse. It's al-ghadab, that the husband openly shows after going through the others that he's displeased, or on its own, some of the scholars said he's displeased with the action, and it can't be based on a mistake. That's the other thing. Because what does he say, subhanahu wa ta'ala, جَعَلَ بَيْنَكُمْ مَوَدَّةً وَرَحْمَةً. Between you, there is love. And mawadda is a lot greater than that. It's endearment. And rahmah, empathy and sympathy. Everyone makes mistakes. Everyone has a bad day. Everyone's sometimes tired and hungry and upset and had an argument with someone or whatever. So it's not about when it's an error. It's about when it's a consistent act that is not being done in the right way. And really the process is that would lead to divorce. Now, that brings me to the second aspect of it. We, as Brother Abu Munir said, are quite recent immigrants. I'm a fair bit older than most of you here. So my dad came here, Allah yarhamu, in the late 60s. And so the mentality that we have, generally speaking, is still the village mentality. We still have that mentality, irrespective of how educated we are, irrespective of what status we've achieved in the greater Australian society. We still have that village mentality, which isn't a bad thing, but unfortunately it belongs in the village. It doesn't really belong here, and that mentality is keep the family together at all costs. That was the mentality. Why? Because in the village, there's the uncle, the neighbour, the auntie, the cousin, the grandmother, the world there, the village there works to make sure that marriage works to make sure those children are looked after. But unfortunately, in the metropolitan, fast life of Sydney in particular, and Australia that we live in, that's not the case. People don't have time for each other. A lot of children grow up, they don't see many of their relatives. They may never have even met their grandparents because their grandparents are from overseas. And so the issue when it comes to that, when it comes to family violence, is when it's perpetrated, firstly, not only is it haram, not only is it impermissible, when a'udhu billahi subhanahu wa ta'ala, but also on top of that, it has an effect on the children. And we know the effects on children, the research is out there, the effects on children are so profound that, there's behavioural, cognitive, emotional, they act out through aggression, conduct disorders, delinquency, truancy, depression, anxiety, low self-esteem, poor social skills, etc., etc., etc. So although the will is there, and the intention is a good intention to keep the family together for the sake of the children, the overwhelming research says that if there's conflict, in other words, the two, and we see that in our families. You know, we don't have a private sphere where we can deal with our issues. Everything's just done in front of everyone, and it's just loud. And when Allah Azza wa Jal, it brings people that shouldn't be brought into it, being the children, into the argument. And so they sometimes have to give emotional support to one other of their parent, or they have to, and that the Family Law Act talks about that same section, that the children are affected by family violence. If they have to clean up after an incident, or they have to comfort a parent after an incident, or if the police or an ambulance shows up after an incident and the child gets affected. And we really are not taking that toll. I remember, and I know this is going to come off a bit weird, but when I grew up, and that was a long time ago, it was a taboo in Australian society to be a single mother. That was in the 70s and early 80s. It really was. I had a friend of mine at school, we were young, in infants and early primary school, and no one would rent a home to his mother because she was a single mother. There was a taboo. And you know, we didn't know about divorce. We never even heard about divorce. So we used to kind of like, look at you know, the non-Muslims are all getting divorced. And look at what it's doing to their kids. We used to have our kids in our classes that were acting out. Over one little tiny thing, they would completely flip out and we'd be like, why are these kids doing that? Why are these kids acting out? We didn't understand. And now it's happening to our children. Now it's happening to our cousins. Now it's happening to our nieces and our nephews. Now it's happening to those that we love, and we're thinking, wait a minute, what's the basis of all this? What's going on? What's the story? So if we look at what they say when it comes to the Sharia and what is the most important thing for children, they say maslahat al-awlad. The maslaha is what's the best for children. And it's not necessarily to stay in a relationship, certainly where there's high conflict. Because high conflict, we learn everything that we have basically from our parents. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in the Qur'an, He says, قَضَى رَبُّكَ أَنْ لَا تَعْبُدُوا إِلَّا إِيَّاهُ وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has decreed that you do not worship other than Him and be excellent towards your parents. Because being excellent towards our parents when we're young teaches us how to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when we're old. That's how strong the relationship is. It's a basis of our iman. And so when there's a problem in that relationship between the parents affects the child, of course that child's going to have difficulties and doubts in themselves, in their iman, in their yaqeen, in their conviction in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then verily their sayr, their progression to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So in terms of the family law court, I get so many brothers coming, oh, you know, I can hit. I heard heaps of brothers, particularly when I was at the mosque at Lakemba, they think they can hit their wives. Habibi, where did you come up with that? Where is there, and I challenge anyone, to bring something from the prophetic tradition where the Prophet of Allah, we know he had 10, 11 wives. When did he ever hit one of them? When did he ever condone anyone else hitting one of his wives? It doesn't exist. It's not in the prophetic traditions. There's nothing there. So, in my view, the prevention of that starts there. It starts with men being men. And when I was at the masjid, and alhamdulillah rabbil alameen, I studied fiqh, and I studied usul fiqh, and I studied the fiqh al-muqarana, which is all the different types of jurisprudence, specializing in family law. And I thought to myself, when I come back to Australia, I'll be well equipped to deal with these situations because mashallah, I've studied so much. And I sat with the top scholars there, and I came back, and for 6 months, I could not work out one mas'ala. When people came and sat in front of me, I'd be like, what are you talking about? I did not come across it in any books of fiqh. None. And so I started to panic as usual, as the fuqaha do. We can't find qala so-and-so, this sheikh said, and this sheikh said, and this sheikh said. So it's panic times. So I said to the mosque, I'll have to go back and get some upgrading on my skills, some continuing professional development or education. So I went back to my scholars, to my teachers in Yemen, and I sat with the dean of the Kulliyat al-Fiqh, the faculty, Jazakallah khair, of jurisprudence. And I'm like, Sheikh, this is the situation. And like, all right, come tomorrow, we'll do usul. We went through usul, there's nothing in it. Went through maqasid al-Sharia, which is the foundations of Sharia. There's nothing there. And then I kept on explaining to him the situations that I was coming across. And believe me, he said to me, "Are these people Muslims?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And he almost fainted. I had to hold him. I'm not exaggerating. He almost fainted. He's never heard anything like this. Of course, he's from a little village. Those things don't happen there. So what he did, he said, "Don't worry, come tomorrow." He came, no books. No books. There's nothing in the books. And just started to explain to me what a man should be as a husband and what a woman should be as a wife. And for the husband, husn al-siyasa. Habibi, you got to be able to cop it. If you can't take it, don't take it and move on. That's life. And the same thing applies for the sisters. It has to be there. And when we look at books like Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, isn't that how the book goes? Right? What did the Prophet say? Crooked rib, same thing, talking to Bedouins. There's going to be, if the Prophet ﷺ talked about Mars and Venus, they would have freaked out. So he talked about the crooked rib, meaning different. Men are different to women. And if we can't get along with each other in that way, then unfortunately it's going to lead to that. Especially when men have that misogynistic attitude towards women. And women, I know it's hard for me because they're going to say, "This sheikh's a misogynist when I say this. Look at this bloke in his turban and his beard. He's a Muslim, look what he's saying." There's their own type of coercive and controlling behavior that women exhibit, which is not direct violence in terms of physical violence, but it's the manipulation, it's those other things that go on, like I'm not going to go into because I don't want to cop it and it's being streamed, someone was saying, so let's just hang off that topic. All right? That's the antagonistic. It takes, as the story says. So that antagonism in terms of how a woman or a wife should deal with her husband. And I think that Dr. John Gray said it the best in that book, Men Are From Mars and Women Are From Venus, that women need to be made to feel special and that they're the only woman on earth, and men need to be respected. That's what the Prophet of Allah spoke about when he spoke about the example of the rib. Women are from a rib and it's crooked, or the most crooked part, a'laha, the top of it. So, what did he say? Don't try and straighten it because it'll break it. Because the Prophet, who was he talking to? He was talking to men. He was talking to the Sahaba. He wasn't denigrating women. He wasn't putting women down. But he was talking to the Sahaba so they knew that men and women are different. So we have to learn to work with one another despite of our differences, kind of the meaning of the hadith. So that's one of the preventative things that we can, that education. Because always, what they say, al-wiqaya khayrun min alfi ilaj. That prevention is better than 1,000 remedies, 1,000 types of medicine. And so if we can instill that in our young blokes, and we can instill that, and generally it's us, gentlemen. I know we don't like to hear it, and we're not really tough guys most of the time, but we lose our cool. And if we don't have anger management as well, how to deal with our anger. And who taught us that? Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. That if we're angry, what do? If we're standing, we sit. If we sit, what do? We lie. If we can't control ourselves, make wudu. A'udhu billahi minash shaitan rajim. We don't teach our kids that when they're young. It's gonna blow out when a'udhu billahi subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's one of the areas where what happens, the brother comes and he says, "Oh, I want to spend time with my children." Unfortunately, the law says if there's any sort of family violence, which all these things are, the brother's in trouble. The brother's in trouble, and then who's in trouble? The kids are in trouble. The statistic is 81% of people in jail. 81% of people in jail have no father figure. And who do we call yatim? The orphan in Islam is the one without a father, not the one without the mother. Because the father teaches a person how to make those dealings, the mu'amalat, how to deal socially speaking. So it's a twofold loss for the person, and particularly the brother that's perpetrating those types of the violence. Firstly, he's going to lose his marriage, or threefold. Secondly, he's going to lose his children or have less contact. Thirdly, he's going to lose his deen. The Lord subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't like those people when a'udhu billah azza wa jal. So that's some background about the how much time do I have, by the way? 10 minutes, thanks. So secondarily, the issue of homelessness. Excuse me. The issue of homelessness. Now, we might think that's an issue that only cropped up in the last 20 or 30 years. But again, if we look at the prophetic tradition, we'll find that at the time of the Prophet of Allah, ﷺ, he had a place in the masjid for the homeless people. Ahl-Suffah they're called. So these were the people generally, it was a little raised platform in the masjid of the Prophet of Allah ﷺ, where generally the muhajirun, the immigrants, or the migrants from Mecca, or the migrants from other Arab tribes throughout the Arabian Peninsula, when they came to Medina, if they didn't have a place to stay, they didn't have family or a friend or whatever it might be to stay in Medina, they would stay there. So the village of homelessness, if you like, was established, in the house of the Prophet, in the masjid, in the masjid of the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And people, when they wanted to give food, when they wanted to do anything, they would come to the Ahl-Suffah and they would give it at that time. They would give it to those people that stayed there. And he also had a work program for them, the Prophet of Allah ﷺ, while they were in the Ahl-Suffah, they would go and bring water during the day, because it wasn't like today, you just turn on the tap all nice and it even comes out hot, mashallah. They had to go and travel to bring water. And also firewood, Hattab they used to call them. The Hattab used to go out to the Badia, to the countryside, and collect firewood and bring it and sell it in the marketplace or trade it for whatever it might be. So Ahl-Suffah, not only did they have a place to stay, not only did people come and give them charity in terms of food or whatever it might be, but he had a work program for them, alayhi salatu wasalam, so that they could have some dignity in the way they lived their lives. So when we talk about this type of thing, when we talk about homelessness, and we from our Islamic point of view, that's the program that the Prophet of Allah ﷺ set up, and we should be looking at programs like that in Australia that match the circumstances in which we live in Australia, so that we can alleviate those circumstances of homelessness. And then also, even for the non-Muslims, Sayyidina Umar Allah marda anhu, when he was the Khalifa, he saw an old man, non-Muslim dhimmi as they're called, begging. And he scolded the governor of that area, and he said, how can this old man who's paid the jizya all his life, how can he now be begging? Take from the public treasury, from Baytul Mal, and make sure this person lives a life of dignity in their old age. So it's not just our worldview for Muslims, from the Qur'an and from the prophetic tradition, is not just for Muslims. Yes, we have to look after those who are closest to us, because we understand their circumstance, we know how to deal with them, and it makes it easier for us to deal with them, and they're more comfortable dealing with us. But it's not just based on those things. All right, and then the next aspect of it, I suppose, is is mental health, which in a lot of ways is tied to homelessness, and even it's tied to family violence. Because when someone has that misogynistic attitude towards women, obviously there's something not working 100% in their psyche, and of course they need to get help, or it's sort of some sort of anger management issue, some regressed feelings or whatever it may be, or some traumatic experience they've suffered in the past. So mental illness was also dealt with in the time of the Prophet of Allah ﷺ. Well, the verses in the Qur'an, it's in the Surah At-Tawbah about haraj. He says, لَيْسَ عَلَى الضُّعَفَاءِ وَلَا عَلَى الْمَرْضَى وَلَا عَلَى الَّذِينَ لَا يَجِدُونَ مَا يُنْفِقُونَ حَرَجٌ. So he says, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the verse, that those people who are disenfranchised, ad-du'afa, the incapacitated, and also the sick, those people, because they weren't able to contribute financially, they weren't able to contribute physically to what was going on at the time of the Prophet, the campaigns that he went on, alayhi salatu wasalam, there's no haraj. In other words, there's no difficulty for them. They don't have to feel bad. They don't have to feel like they're dysfunctional. They're allowed to exist in their state. And the marad, we're talking about illness in the first instance, the physical illnesses. If a person's got a physical illness, they may not even have to make wudu, or some parts of their body they may not have to wash them. Or if they've got a knee injury or a back injury, they don't have to make ruku' or sujood or any of these types of things. So also the mental illness was around in the time of the Prophet of Allah ﷺ, and there's a Sahabi, he's a Badri. It's a bit funny, but it's a bit... he went on top of the roof and he urinated on people and he did all sorts of weird stuff, and the Prophet of Allah ﷺ used to say, leave him. Why? He had some sort of a mental illness. But he was a person that used to pray and fast and do all these things. And in terms of mental illness, the ulama have said, al-junun funun, that mental illness had so many different variations and so many different types. And so what they used to do, if someone used to claim that someone had a mental illness, they would watch that person for a year. Maybe it was in the spring or the summer or the autumn, or when it rained or when it didn't rain or when it was windy. So you might say the first DSM, we're up to 5, I understand. The first DSM was from the Muslims, looking at the conditions of people and how that related to their situations. So also addiction, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in the first instance, the prevention for us is tazkiyah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He mentions in the Qur'an, He sent a prophet, يَتْلُ عَلَيْهِمْ آيَاتِهِ وَيُزَكِّيهِمْ. So for those who don't have an addiction, the way to stay away from addiction is to purify oneself in terms of one's actions and one's thoughts and the way one thinks about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and other human beings and about oneself. That's the essence of it. And then in the second category, when people have an addiction, there's a whole ruling in the Sharia called hukm al-mubtali. So the ruling about those who are afflicted by some sort of an addiction. And at the time of the Prophet of Allah, we know about the Sahabi, he was drinking, the Sahaba complained to the Prophet of Allah as an alcoholic, and he was drinking, and the Prophet said, does he pray? They said, yes. He said, leave him. So in terms of the hudud again, to show how serious it is, if someone is mubtali or mubtala, right, they're afflicted, they don't just bring the had on them, like we would say kleptomaniac. If someone was a kleptomaniac and they were stealing everything, they wouldn't just chop their hand in the first instance. That would not be the case. They'd have to be rehabilitated first. They'd have to understand. Same with drinking, same with if it's nymphomania or whatever, fornicating, all those different things. So that's the standard in the Sharia. I'll get to the end of it as soon as, sorry, because it's tying in. So about what Abu Munir was saying at the beginning, about what is our relationship to these people. That's the key in my view. And I know Abu Ismail, that's his view as well. What's our relationship as people we consider ourselves quite sane, without having addictions, inshallah, without being misogynist or whatever it might be? What's our relationship to these people? So there's the financial one, which was mentioned about the zakat and the sadaqat lil-fuqara wal-masakin. So these people, they would be considered masakin in the istilah, in the vernacular of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Those who are disenfranchised. So there's two categories. There's the fuqara, those who basically have nothing, and there's the masakin, those who are disenfranchised. I believe that would be the appropriate word in our vernacular. So the disenfranchised people are those that may have something. Masakina ya'maluna fil bahr. You would have read yesterday in Surah Al-Kahf. They're masakin, but they've got enough just to have a little boat. But you know the story in Surah Al-Kahf. So these people would be masakin. So firstly, as was said by Abu Munir, that they deserve that money. And of course we have to have zakat in Australia. Of course we do. We have so many social afflictions in this country that they can't even be counted or discussed even. They're so huge and they're increasing all the time. They're constantly increasing. So that's one thing. The second thing is what the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wa alihi wa sahbihi wasallam made dua about. What did he say? Allahumma ahyini maskinan wa amitni miskinan wa ahshurni fi dhumratil masakin. Like, this is so poignant, so relevant for us in terms of our attitude towards others who are in this situation, who are afflicted, or whatever the circumstance that we spoke about, homeless, whatever the case might be. He said, Ya Allah, allow me to live as a miskin. And it's not disenfranchised financially, but allow me to live as those people who have humility. And they say at-tadhallul, or they say al-khudu'. In other words, those who are humble and have humbled themselves. Allow me to die like that. And Ya Allah, resurrect me on the day of judgment with those people, because they got no hisab. Yeah? Those people won't be taken into account. So yeah, we think sometimes we're superior, I'm not in that situation, but it's not the case, because the people with the most money and the people with the most affluence, they'll be judged first, and their judgment will go on a lot longer. And the rest will go in without question. What did he say? He said, alayhi salatu wasalam, Rizukni hubb al-masakin. He said, allow me, Ya Allah, to have love for the masakin. And the scholars say that's a two-way love. That the masakin, the disenfranchised, love him, alayhi salatu wasalam, and that he loves the disenfranchised. And so that should be our approach. Whether we can financially assist or we can't financially assist, that's a secondary issue. The primary issue is that if we want to be true followers and emulators of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wa alihi wa sahbihi wasallam, That has to be imbued within our hearts and embodied in our actions. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa alihi wa sallam. Jazakumullah khair. Sorry, it took longer than I was allowed to.